Hello and welcome to today's program, Envisioning a Healthier Walnut Creek Watershed. My name is Albert Garcia and I'm very happy to be here today with this program, and I'm happy to be partnering with our presenters. Before I hand it over to them, I do want to talk a little bit about the Contra Costa County Library Services. If you haven't visited one of our libraries or our website, I highly encourage you to do so. Get a library card or get a digital library card. We are checking out Raspberry Pi computers as well as STEAM kits for kids. The Contra Costa County Library is happy to connect you with our resources, services, and materials at all 26 of our libraries. Access more than 1 million physical items, including international language collections, and thousands of digital materials 24/7 at ccclib.org. Visit any library to use our public computers, printers, and free Wi-Fi. You can also visit one of our branches with laptops for on-site use or check out a Wi-Fi hotspot for 3 weeks. Contra Costa County Library's Adult Literacy Program trains and supports volunteer tutors to deliver basic literacy instruction to adults throughout the county. Visit our website and sign up for a digital library card today. I'm now going to hand it over to our presenters, Tim Jensen, and thank you very much for being here. Take it away.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Tim Jensen with the Contra Costa County Flood Control District. I'm our Assistant Chief Engineer and manage the Flood Control Division of the Public Works Department. We're so glad you're here tonight. This meeting is to discuss envisioning a healthier Walnut Creek watershed. We are calling this effort the Walnut Creek Watershed Restoration Plan. We're glad that you chose to join us today, and we look forward to your assistance in developing a comprehensive Walnut Creek Watershed Restoration Plan. Next slide, please. The purpose of this meeting is informational, to provide you with what we're doing and what we're planning on doing, and to allow you to let us know your input, your additions and suggestions that can help us with this process. So feel free to submit questions tonight. This meeting is about including you and having you help us out. We will have a dedicated time for answering questions at the end. There will be a couple of interactive polls going on during the meeting that will help us gather information. So we appreciate your assistance. And this meeting is being recorded, so hopefully others can watch it in the future, those maybe that weren't able to make it tonight. Next slide, please. We do have a team of people working on this, but we definitely value your input. We have myself from the Flood Control District and Sarah Duckler from the Flood Control District. We also have Claudia Gimmerling with the County Public Works Department Environmental Division, Bob Simmons with the Walnut Creek Watershed Council, Lisa Demerel with the Contra Costa Resource Conservation District, and then we have Ken Schwartz and Emma White with Montrose Environmental helping us with this effort. Now I'd like to turn it over to Sarah Duckler, Senior Civil Engineer with the Flood Control District. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you, Tim. So we're working on a watershed plan, and we just wanted to start out with what is a watershed? So we all live in a watershed, although we may not live in one as beautiful as this green watershed example up on the screen right now, but it shows a good example of a watershed, which is basically a land area that drains to a common waterway. So you can see how the side of all these hills drain downhill and into that main channel that's running through the valley and towards us on the screen. Let's take a look at sort of a generic watershed. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is kind of a cartoon of a watershed, a sketch, and it shows how a watershed is defined along the red dotted lines as the land, again, where precipitation, rainfall, all the precipitation that falls in that area, defined by that red dashed line, eventually drains down into the rivers and creeks, into those smaller tributaries that join up with the larger river and flows out to a receiving body of water like the bay in our case. So that red dashed line is drawn along the tops of the ridges that encircle the watershed, and that shows you that water that falls outside of that red line is going to another watershed over on the other side of the hills. So those smaller creeks are tributaries to the larger river, and they form their own small sub-watersheds or tributary watersheds that join up into the larger river or creek. And in our case, that would be Walnut Creek with some smaller creeks that join it. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a map of sort of the greater Bay Area in California to show you where the Walnut Creek watershed is. It's that gray blob kind of right in the middle of this region, and most of us know our landscape by the freeways that we drive. So we highlighted the major freeways in our area. You can see the Bay Area. And running right through the Walnut Creek watershed in the north-south direction is that red freeway, which is Highway 680. And then joining it and crossing over almost in the middle of the watershed is that yellow freeway, which is Highway 24. So the 24-680 interchange is kind of right in the middle of the Walnut Creek watershed. So most of us are pretty familiar with where that is. Take a look at the size of the Walnut Creek watershed. It's really big. It's bigger than the city and county of San Francisco, which you can see across the bay. It's one of the larger watersheds in the Bay Area, and it flows northward and empties out, and that, remember, there's a single point that a watershed empties out into the next water body. It flows northward and empties out into the Sassoon Bay, actually the Carquinez Strait, right there, that body of water that connects the delta, which is the freshwater, the rivers that flow out to the bay, to our San Francisco Bay, which is saltwater. So Walnut Creek flows pretty close to the border between the delta and the San Francisco Bay, which is kind of in the area that's transitioning from saltwater to freshwater. So that's another interesting fact about Walnut Creek. The watershed is situated between the East Bay Hills on the left side of your screen and the Mount Diablo Range on the right side of the gray blob. So that's the valley, if you think back to that beautiful green watershed that we started with. Let's go to the next slide and take a closer look at Contra Costa County. So this blob is the outline of Contra Costa County. And on the west side of the county, which is the left side of your screen, well, first of all of the different colors are different watersheds in Contra Costa County. So on the left side, or the west side of the county, those smaller watersheds drain out to San Francisco Bay. And on the right side of Contra Costa County, that's the Delta area. And then along the top, or the north side, those watersheds drain towards the north to the Carquinez Strait. So the bluish, grayish blob in the middle, that's the Walnut Creek watershed that we'll be talking about and studying. And again, you can see it is the largest watershed in Contra Costa County. It's a big one. Side note, Contra Costa County, against the coast, we are against like a lot more water than you would think. The San Francisco Bay, the Carquinez Strait, and the Delta. We're a kind of a coastal county. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And we're going to zoom into the Walnut Creek watershed so we can all be situated here. Again, north-south, we see Highway 680. It's joined by Highway 24, right almost in the middle of the watershed. And this topographic map, you can kind of visualize a little bit better the valley that the main stem, or Walnut Creek, runs through. It's running north up to the Carquinez Strait, and water's flowing down from the sides of both of those sets of hills and into the main stem of the Walnut Creek. Let's look at the next slide. Okay, so here we are. This is Contra Costa County again, and you can see all of the creeks, all those squiggly little light blue lines are creeks flowing down from the hills into various watersheds. And the one outlined in red, that's the Walnut Creek watershed. You can see it has lots of side creeks, and they're draining down into that valley, which drains into the main stem, Walnut Creek. The dark blue lines along the creeks show us where the Contra Costa County Flood Control District has flood protection facilities. So those are typically the larger major channels that run through urban areas or along the valley floor, and they have been modified to accommodate flood flows to protect people from flooding. So these are the channels that you see when you're driving around in the urban and suburban areas. But you can see that there are a lot of side channels that are not part of flood control districts channels and that haven't been modified. And so most of those could be in parks or public spaces or potentially on private land. So there's a lot of creeks outside of what the flood control district manages, and a lot of different topography. Again, the relief that you see on this map, you can see Mount Diablo actually over on the right side or the east side of the watershed. So the Walnut Creek watershed actually drains part of Mount Diablo. It's quite a varied watershed. Now that I've shown you sort of the outline and the creeks and the flood control district facilities within the Walnut Creek watershed, I'm going to hand it over to Bob Simmons, who's going to talk about the Walnut Creek Watershed Council and their role in the Walnut Creek watershed.
Good evening. We started meeting as a Watershed Council back in around 2011. We met informally for a while, and we formed a voluntary stakeholder group. We started meeting monthly with speakers, and we've continued throughout. In 2019, we received some mitigation funds for offsite mitigation for a bridges project where they couldn't do the mitigation on site. And at that stage, when we realized we might be receiving money going forward for doing creek restoration works, we realized we needed to morph from an unincorporated association to a 501c3, which we did in 2021. So we are a relatively new organization. Our structure includes a 6-member board. As the side notes indicate, we meet as a full council bi-monthly via Zoom. We normally have a speaker, but our next meeting, which is tomorrow, we're actually going to focus on the Watershed Restoration Plan, this outreach meeting, and our next steps. And please feel welcome to attend and participate. The 5 members of the board, we have 6 members of the board, but 5 of the members represent the 5 creek groups. And I'll just repeat something. Well, in looking at this slide, starting at the upper right, these are the 5 creek groups that are members of the board. They're representatives, members of the board. The Friends of the Concord Creeks is the newest group. It has focused on creek-related community events, planting, trash removal, and has its own Facebook page, which it uses to announce events that it is doing. And it is also the creek steward for Mount Diablo Creek, which is in a watershed, which is in its own watershed. Continuing in a clockwise direction, the Friends of the Creeks is its own 501c3 organization, and it is the oldest of the creek groups. It has been conducting creek cleanups in Walnut Creek for at least 3 decades. But it is now more focused on creek restoration activities, and you can see some of those activities in Civic Park in Walnut Creek. Continuing again in a clockwise direction at the lower right is the logo for Friends of San Ramon Creek. That is the largest tributary watershed of Walnut Creek. They have been very active, particularly with removal of Arundodonax, an invasive species that causes flooding problems, is a fire risk, and excludes any and all wildlife from residing within its very dense vegetation. And in addition, they mapped over 300 stands of Arundel in the entire watershed, and a very effective program working on it. They also do occasional presentations, usually in Danville, that are open to the community. Continuing to the left to Lafayette Creeks. Lafayette Creeks Committee is actually a committee of the city of Lafayette. And it has been doing some excellent work both in creek restoration along Mount Diablo Boulevard, assisting in terms of a rain garden that we'll see a bit later, and other activities. And then on the upper left is the logo for Friends of Pleasant Hill Creeks. It is also a 501c3 organization. It has been quite active in advocacy, and its efforts were highly successful in obtaining a revised landscape design for the new Pleasant Hill Public Library that focuses on the creek, that protects the creek, and actually makes the creek part of the library program, at least provides the potential for it. And they also conducted and have conducted a regular bird survey that is very interesting in terms of the number of species of birds that are identified and the frequency of their arrival. So now we have our first poll, in which you have a chance to indicate which of the 5 tributaries you either live or work in, and what you most enjoy about our creeks. So we'll take a couple minutes for the survey. There we go.
I'll give it a couple more seconds here for folks to finish the poll. All right, and here we have the results of the first poll. So it looks like there is a good mixture here of people from the different areas. And then our second question, how do you enjoy the creeks or watershed lands? Looks like the majority of people said walking, hiking, and running. And we also had some biking, wildlife viewing, birding. A good variety here.
All right. You think it's time we can proceed to the next slide? So our next 3 slides show wildlife in the watershed. And when the people that have formed the 5 creeks groups started getting together, one of the principal reasons they did so was because of wildlife in our watershed. But there are many other benefits to creating a healthier watershed. We're all interested in doing that. But I will add that the presence of wildlife in our riparian areas is an indicator of the health of those areas. So on this first page, the first photo is of a red-shouldered hawk, which is grasping a crawdad. It is great for the hawk, but not so great for the crawdad. Below that is the western pond turtle, and then to the right is a photo of a river otter that was provided to us by the River Otter Ecology Project. Next slide, please. This slide shows a cormorant that is sunning itself probably perhaps in the morning when it's warming up, and it needs to warm up, and it uses the sun to do that. But one of the things that's interesting about this slide is it shows some of the infrastructure that we all need and use to get around every day, and how sometimes wildlife can adapt to some of that infrastructure. So it really is a nice slide, from a nice photo from the standpoint of showing that some wildlife can live with some of our infrastructure and do so, and they adapt to it, as this cormorant is clearly enjoying the natural environment in and around the infrastructure for the roads. Next slide, please. When Sarah talked earlier about the modifications of Walnut Creek, the creek, it is really heavily modified in the main stem of Walnut Creek. And this drop structure, which is referred to as drop structure number 1, is one of those structures that impacts fish passage in particular. And for several people within the creek groups, fish passage is really an important objective of what we would like to see accomplished in this restoration plan. We hope that the plan will focus on that and enable us to evaluate, understand the role and the functions and the need of drop structures, and in addition, sometimes the ways where we may be able to modify or to be blunt, to remove them. So that's one of the reasons for showing this Chinook salmon trying to leap up to the next layer as it tries to complete its migration up to a spawning area. So with that, I'll pass it to the next slide. And I think it's Claudia.
No, Bob, it's Ken here.
Sorry, Ken.
No problem at all. Thanks, everyone. And thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Ken Schwartz, a consultant helping to support the planning effort here. And I wanted to just take a minute to tell you a little bit about the plan and the purpose. And several of these ideas have already been raised, but just to encapsulate it, the goal here is to identify opportunities to improve watershed health. And when we say watershed health, that can mean several things. It can mean water quality, habitat, flood management, improving or lifting natural resources, protecting them, conserving them. And, you know, I think a good plan will identify ways to do all of these things. And as Bob described in the previous slide, sometimes you might have things that appear to be competing objectives. You might see the salmon trying to jump up and can't get above that barrier, right? But that barrier is perhaps providing flood management or flood protection to the areas around. So the question becomes, how do you achieve these mutual objectives together to the betterment of the entire watershed? And that's what the plan is hoping to do. It's a pretty lofty goal, so we're going to try our best. In developing this plan, it's a really nice example also of multiple parties coming together. So we have the County Flood Control District, the FCD there, Contra Costa Resource Conservation District, the RCD, and the Walnut Creek Watershed Council, nonprofit group representing several areas within the watershed, and creek steward groups, and working together in a collaborative approach. And that's what's really a great opportunity here. And, you know, we're today speaking to you, the public in general, to also look for partners in you and your ideas and your participation. In addition to these purposes or goals, the plan also supports a requirement. The Regional Water Quality Control Board, they're one of 9 regional, the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board is one of 9 regional water boards around the state of California. And that's the water board that has jurisdiction over the Walnut Creek watershed. And through some past activities, they basically proposed or required this idea to develop a holistic and integrated restoration projects. And the best way to kind of think about how to develop such projects is to make a plan. So you can kind of see what projects are out there, compare them, maybe combine some or prioritize some. And so that's another objective of this plan. Next slide, please. So a little bit on the plan development process, the steps that we're going to go through here. So first of all, there's been a lot of really good thinking and idea and planning for several years in this watershed. We're not the first here by any means. There have been many studies, many good ideas put out there. We're reviewing those. And we're collecting data from those plans. We're also looking at maps and collecting GIS data so that we can compare locations of different ideas and concepts and projects. And then we're also developing criteria in which to evaluate these different projects. We're going to go look at these sites in the field and further assess them and see which opportunities are kind of ripe for taking an action. And maybe others are a little more constrained or challenged and can't be implemented immediately. Along the way, we're going to meet with stakeholders like tonight for input and feedback, and then develop a draft plan and then provide that for people's review and commenting. So next click, please. So if I just kind of summarize it, we're going to identify opportunities, and that could be projects or concepts. When we say project, that's something that's really kind of thought through, maybe a little more refined. It's located, it may even have a design, maybe there's already been environmental review for it. A concept is a little more abstract in that there's a notion that something needs to be done here. There's a need for something, but we're not sure quite what that is yet. And so in putting a plan together, there can be a range from fully kind of formed ideas and projects into more conceptual things. We're going to evaluate those opportunities, and then we're going to prioritize them or group them and say that these are more achievable or these perhaps have a potentially greater benefit. So with that background, I'm going to turn it over here to Lisa to carry on the conversation with some example projects.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks, Ken. I'm Lisa Damerel with the Contra Costa Resource Conservation District. I'm here to share a couple of example restoration projects that have already been completed to give you a sense of a couple of types of projects that could be included in the restoration plan. So the Lafayette Creeks Committee, the City of Lafayette, and Restoration Design Group recently constructed a rain garden near the Lafayette Library. If you haven't seen it, I recommend visiting. On the left side of the slide, you can see the site, which is directly adjacent to Lafayette Creek, which is on the far left side of this photo on the left. This steeply sloped lot has been transformed into a carefully designed rain garden, which can be seen on the right. This green infrastructure project will serve to filter and absorb stormwater runoff, which will reduce pollution entering the creek. The garden also features native plants that support native wildlife. This project is a great example of how a previously inaccessible vacant area next to a creek is now a functional and beautiful feature that the community can enjoy. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next, I'd like to share with you a project that took place at Hap McGee Park in Danville along San Ramon Creek. The Friends of San Ramon Creek have been working tirelessly to rid their area of the invasive plant called Arundo donax, which Bob mentioned earlier. Shown on the left, that is an adult in the photo for scale. This invasive plant grows to be very large, and without getting too in the weeds, this invasive plant can choke up creeks and reduce water flow, and it displaces native plants. It's also a flood and fire hazard. So once this plant is removed, there are resources and room for other beneficial plants to grow, and the creek can flow unobstructed. So you can see the difference between the before and after is pretty stark. Another benefit is that people can now see and enjoy the creek in this area. This project is a great example of creek restoration involving invasive plant removal. And while this particular project was at a park, the Friends of San Ramon Creek also work with private landowners to eradicate invasive plants from their properties as well. Removing invasives can reveal other issues, and I'll pass the mic to Bob to talk about that.
So what this slide shows, and I like these two sets of pictures because of what it shows. It shows a photo of basketballs, beach balls, and soccer balls, among other things in the creek. On the far side of the creek, you can see a stand of Arundo donax. On the near side of the creek, you see, basically some tannish areas. That is an area where that private landowner agreed to have the Friends of San Ramon Creek remove the Arundo donax. And you can see what potential presents for future planning activities. But the other thing that when we were down there removing the Arundo, we had finished removing the Arundo, and we looked down and we saw what was in the creek. We realized that our day was not done, and we had to do a few more things in terms of a creek cleanup. And what had happened here was that the Arundo Donax was this was in the creek. That some of the fronds were in the creek itself, even though they were growing from the land, and had blocked passage of things like beach balls, styrofoam, etc. And so we did a creek cleanup. But I think the slide shows another thing, which is I mentioned at the beginning, which is really, it's one thing to deal with public property owners. It's another to deal with private property owners, and some of who understand, some of whom don't, some of whom like the process, some of whom don't. And it presents an additional challenge to the work that the San Ramon Creek group has been doing very well at. And it's particularly problematic when you have property lines that you have to respect, but you have an invasive species that doesn't have any respect for property lines. So anyhow, so that's an example of a creek cleanup that was not scheduled with a lot of volunteers, but just happened because of what was removed from the creek. With that, I'll pass it on to the next slide, which I'm sure this time is Claudia.
Thank you, Bob. So I'm Claudia Gemberling with the Contra Costa County Public Works Department. And this slide is an example of an offsite mitigation area that's along Lafayette Creek. While the plan is to benefit the health of the watershed and address community needs and interests, the plan will also provide mitigation opportunities for development projects that will have impacts on waterways and wetlands and waterways and wetlands for the most part, and riparian areas, which will provide funding for restoration projects. So this is a good example for an offsite mitigation that was done for the Marsh Drive Bridge replacement project in Concord. So this is, as mentioned, along Lafayette Creek. We worked with the Walnut Creek Watershed Council, and we were able to locate 2 areas to mitigate our impacts by working with the Watershed Council and to comply with the mitigation requirements from the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So as you can see in these photos, the restoration included removal of the invasive ivy and planting it with native plants, creepy wild rye and valley sedges, etc. And it's going into its 3rd year, and it's continuing its success of being covered by native plants more so, but with the help of ongoing invasive plant removal as we continue on with in the years. We look forward to more opportunities for other developers and agencies to be able to mitigate that will benefit the overall goal on getting these restoration projects online. And with that, I will hand it off to the next person.
Hello. So this example is a little different. The previous examples were things that have already been implemented and done. This is a case of a potential project or an idea. And what we see here is, so just let me first locate you. This is Walnut Boulevard here. This is Eckley Lane, and this is Walnut Creek Christian Science Church. And this is the church parking lot. And the church and its parking lot are located here. In this case, it's adjacent to a tributary of Walnut Creek, an unnamed tributary, but it's a creek course here. And this creek isn't perennial. It's generally seasonal, intermittent, and sometimes ephemeral, meaning it carries water immediately kind of during a storm or after a storm, or in particularly wet years, maybe there's seasonal flow there. But when the creek enters kind of this zone here, it enters into a pipe and then is piped beneath the parking lot. And then it emerges out of the pipe and continues downstream. So we have a situation where we have a kind of a creek under a somewhat natural water course and entering a pipe, and then it kind of returns to a natural creek course. So the concept here is, could we open and return or restore this creek back to being an open channel? And that term's called daylighting, when you take a creek out of a culvert or out of a pipe and you expose it to day. And it's called daylighting. And there's several benefits in daylighting a creek. There's both physical benefits in that, you know, when a creek is flowing through here in a pipe here, there's not opportunities, for example, for infiltration or recharge, groundwater below. There are water quality benefits of storing and detaining flows in a natural system. And then there's certainly habitat and ecological benefits of not having a riparian corridor encased in a pipe, right? So there's an opportunity here. And let me show you what this looks like a little bit on the ground. Thanks, Emma, for the pictures there. So you can see photo number 1, and here it is number 1. And so that's where the natural creek course enters into a pipe here and then flows downstream here along the dashed line below the parking lot. And the next photo 2, I can't see it on mine, but it's the photo below here. And you're seeing where the creek is kind of coming and exiting out of the parking lot and heading in the north direction. And that's photo 2. So here's an opportunity. And these types of projects, daylighting projects, have been successful all over the Bay Area and California. But it takes a partnership. It takes a willingness. It takes funding, of course. It takes some environmental studies. It takes all of those things. So right now, this is just an idea, and it could turn into something. But the plan needs to, again, invite ideas as well as already kind of well cooked up projects. So this is just an example of a potential project that could be successful one day. Next slide, please.
We actually have a brief poll right here to ask
Oh.
folks about types of restoration projects that they'd be interested in. So I'll go ahead and launch that right now. All right, give it a couple more seconds to allow the last folks to submit their responses. Take a quick look at the results. You can see that there is varied interest in everything from wildlife and fish habitat to invasive plant removal, green infrastructure. Looks like all of these categories have some interest, so it's very exciting. We have interest in so many different types of projects. All right, and I'm going to pass it back over to Ken for the
Thanks,
next
Emma.
slide.
Thank you. So just a few words here about kind of the anticipated timeline in developing the plan. And this timeline may be a little optimistic, but right now we're here in the winter. We're conducting some initial outreach, speaking to folks in the community, and we're also collecting reference materials, collecting our GIS, that's Geographic Information Systems, I should have said that earlier, and also developing our plan criteria to evaluate the opportunity. So that's going to kind of carry us through this winter, and in the spring, we are going to be further continuing to evaluate the opportunities, conducting some field assessments at potential sites, and starting to draft the plan, including the outline, and drafting the plan through the summer and into the fall. And we hope to have a draft plan by the end of the year that we can share for feedback and revision. Again, this is a little optimistic perhaps, but this is our kind of our goal here. And again, along the way, what we want to do is be sure to at key moments check in with stakeholders in the watershed. And we've had a similar meeting tonight to public agencies in the watershed. Tonight's focus is more the general public, and we'll continue this outreach and engagement. And in a couple slides, we're going to tell you how to reach us. And I think I'm going to turn it over now to Lisa.
Thank you, Ken. So how can you get involved? There are a number of ways you can get involved. We'd love to hear your project ideas and about locations that you think could use restoration. This will help make the plan more robust. You can use the Q&A function in this webinar to ask questions, or even to share some ideas if you have any at the moment. And of course, you can volunteer to participate in creek cleanups, planting events, and restoration activities. The Flood Control District, the Creek Stewardship Groups, and the Resource Conservation District all host these types of events. And you can find more information about those events on their respective websites. And as Bob mentioned before, you can join us at Walnut Creek Watershed Council meetings, which are virtual meetings that are open to the public. And now we'll have a final poll for you tonight to determine if you would like to be added to an email list to receive updates about the Walnut Creek Watershed Plan. And yeah, thank you for launching that poll, and we'd appreciate it. We hope you want to hear more about this. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. Thank you. A couple more seconds for this poll. All right, Emma, I think we're good on that poll. If you didn't get to give us your email address and you'd like to, we'll have contact information at the end of this presentation so that you can see who you can reach out to. Next slide, please. So we wanted to let you know that the creek stewardship groups that we've talked about tonight will be hosting outreach meetings throughout the Walnut Creek watershed. And these meetings will provide you an opportunity to connect with your local creek group if you aren't already connected, and a space to provide feedback and ideas for the Watershed Restoration Plan. Some of the details for these meetings, as you can see in the slide, are still being worked out, but we wanted to give you a sense of what's coming up. And as the meeting details are confirmed, we will put these meetings up on the event calendar at wcwatershed.org. So we hope that you're interested in potentially talking to your neighbors and talking to people in the areas that you're interested in to provide feedback. And now I'll pass it to Bob to wrap up. Thanks.
Okay. First of all, thank you for attending and being part of our presentation. We are going to have an extensive opportunity for question and answer. And I see there are some questions already that posted. So I'll just, if you have any questions, putting them into the Q&A function is the best way to do that. But I wanted to mention a couple things before we turn over to the Q&A session. The very first thing is to thank the Contra Costa County Library System for hosting us tonight. It is an excellent resource for this type of presentation that allows us to go countywide to a lot of different people. And we just want to do a special thank you to the library for that service that it provides. We talked about the restoration plan, the timing of it. And at least from my standpoint, the Watershed Council standpoint, we hope that our major effort will be done by December, and that we'll be able to submit a report to the regulatory agencies. In that plan, we hope to identify more than 50 potential restoration sites, with some special focus on a few of them that we think have more promise. We'll proceed to identify those in more detail. And so we would really appreciate any ideas or suggestions you have for possible additional sites. I want to mention, following up on that point for a second, we really have only scratched the surface of the creek and the wetland restoration that can be done in the watershed. There's a huge amount of work that can be done. This plan, this initial restoration plan that we hope to complete by December of this year, will, I believe, identify or establish and guide the restoration activities in this watershed for 20 to 30 years. And when you think about that and you realize that it takes 5 to 10 years to do a watershed project from the time of idea to the time of completion, if it's a significant project, that is important. And it's important for us to seek your involvement and your participation in something that could have that much of an effect on the riparian areas in particular of our watershed. So we hope that you will want to be involved, and you hope that you will be interested in helping us restore the creeks and the wetland areas in our watershed. Our council is part of its role as an advocacy group. And we were very excited about the possibility of doing a watershed restoration plan. We're really very, very pleased to have the Contra Costa Flood Control and Water Conservation District and the Contra Costa Resource Conservation District as our partners, as our collaborators in this effort. We've had a very good working relationship so far. We think that is going to provide the basis for a very strong and meaningful restoration plan. And we hope that you will be very, very interested in participating with us and with the two districts in a watershed restoration plan that will improve the health of our watershed for many, many years. With that, let's turn to the next slide, which has some information, and then the Q&A. I think we can start. With this, I don't know if I was supposed to. But this, if you have any further, if you have questions or you want to get involved in some way, what we want to have this slide up for while we're doing the Q&A is that if you want to, you can write down a contact information and write to one of us, and we'll try to get you the answer to the question. So with that, Emma, I see some questions in the Q&A. Do you want to start the process of helping us answer those questions?
Yes, that sounds great. All right, so the first question is, which creek group does unincorporated Lafayette fall into? Are there any active ongoing projects to maintain and restore the creek tributaries that are eroding at a significant rate?
Okay, those are two very different questions. As to the first one, I would say it depends. If the unincorporated property is to the west of the city of Lafayette, it's probably the Lafayette Creek Committee that you want to talk to, as well as either north or south. If it's to the east, it's probably going to be the Friends of the Creeks, which is the Walnut Creek-based organization. And for example, Tice Creek, which flows out of Rossmore, is one that the Friends of the Creeks pays a lot of attention to. Your second question is more complex and difficult, and I might want to defer to one of the people more knowledgeable about that. But I think it's fair to say when I said there was a lot of opportunity for restoration activities in this watershed, there are. And that's an example of one of them. And clearly from the flood control standpoint, doing things that affect the sedimentation in our watershed is very important. With that, I'll see if somebody from the flood control district wishes to add to that answer.
Hi, this is Tim Jensen. Sure, be happy to help with this. And there are not currently any active or ongoing projects to work on the creek tributaries that we're aware of. However, part of the reason for this meeting is to gather more information about where some of those issues are. So if you have any of that information, photographs, X's on a map, whatever you have, get that to us because we would like to investigate further and look for those types of opportunities. So thank you for bringing that up.
You. And with that, we will move to the next question. I think this is referring to the first poll. Is there no boating or swimming at the creeks?
There is not in any of the creeks that I'm familiar with, except that I would be surprised if there aren't sometimes some people go into the creeks to swim or to just go into the water. But there's no boating until you get below drop structure number 1 that I'm aware of.
And then in the watershed itself, the Lafayette Reservoir has a lot of boating opportunities.
Thank you.
I think people swim in the bay, but I don't know if I've ever seen people swimming at the mouth of Walnut Creek.
But there is going to be kayaking.
That's right.
Next question.
Thank you for answering that one. The next one, how do we overcome the ingrained and overwhelming weight given to flood protection? Many flood basins could have multiple benefits.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that question as best I can. And one of the ways we're doing that is partnering with other agencies such as Walnut Creek Watershed Council, also groups like American Rivers who restore streams and rivers and maybe even remove dams and do big things like that. Those are some agencies that we're partnering with so we can start thinking out of the box. A lot of times the 99% of the time, the original flood control facilities were built by the Army Corps of Engineers or the Soil Conservation Service, a federal agency, and they have certain criteria, and they were a very single-focused facility. But now as opportunities arise, grant funding arises, we are able to modify basins, et cetera, to have benefits such as trails and habitat value, outdoor education, classrooms, those kind of things. So we do have one model facility that we would like to do in other places of the county is our Milton-Kubitschek Basin over right next to Northgate High School. And that does have a lot of habitat value, has a trail going through it, and it's also an outdoor classroom opportunity for Northgate High School students.
Thank you, Tim. It appears that there is some interest in Tice Creek and Upper Tice Creek, as well as the Sakhalin Indian Community Base. Thank you for sharing that interest. There's a question about if there has been any creek restoration done in and around Rossmore.
A few years ago, at the entrance to Rossmore, there was a drop structure that failed. And it just sort of collapsed. And I think they worked with the flood control district at the time, but they designed, and I say they hired somebody to design a series of step downs and to plant native plants along that couple 100-foot stretch. And you can go there now, and it's handling the water well, and the native plants are doing well. That's the only one in or near Rossmore that I'm aware of.
And I can add to that, similar to an earlier question about Lafayette Creeks, that one of the reasons we're embarking on this effort is to find out what's going on. And we really don't know what's happening behind the gates of Rossmore. The Golden Rain Foundation takes care of everything there, but we'd be very interested in meeting with them and hearing about what their issues are, where restoration opportunities are, their challenges, et cetera. So that's one of the steps that we will be taking on this journey.
All right, next question. I'm familiar with similar projects in the South Bay. My understanding is that a relatively small amount of homeless living in the creek beds has significantly undermined efforts to restore the watershed. What is your plan to deal with this population?
Wow. Okay.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
That's a challenging question we've been dealing with for many years, and we feel we're making small incremental advancements, but it is challenging because the homeless are not just living in the creeks, they're causing a lot of waste and hazardous waste, as well as now they're digging holes in the creek banks and causing additional problems. So it's something that we're definitely tackling and working with housing representatives, working with shelters. Something we added just a few years ago is an outreach program that goes out looking for homeless and talks to them and tries to get them into the shelters and get them better places to live. So that's a program that we're looking to expand and work more closely with our county advocates. Because anyway, there's a lot of different needs of the unsheltered population that a flood control district or a creek group cannot provide. So we have to work with partners. Thanks for bringing this up, though.
All right, next question. What time frame does the plan cover?
I don't know that that's been precisely defined yet, but it like many plans, I mean, it's not a specific period that it ends in 2050 or anything like that. And I think that's one of the things that we will probably identify as we move through this planning process. But I said near the end that I felt that this plan will guide restoration activities for the next 20 or 30 years. Having said that, we don't view this as a plan that is just going to be put on the shelf and never change. We view this part of the plan, the restoration component of the plan, be something that will be more of a living document that can be modified as time goes by, as we find new sites or new funding to do restoration.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, some of the projects that will be in the plan will be projects that aren't possible to do now, but may be possible to do in the future. And so we recognize that, and it's still worthwhile to include those kinds of ideas and concepts in the plan.
Next question about overall logistics of the plan. Is this meant to be a plan to restore the entire watershed or only chosen sections?
I can start that answer. So currently we are looking for opportunities, and off the bat, we're not going to discover everything, but as many as we can. We anticipate getting a pretty large list and covering quite a bit of the watershed. However, we'll have to prioritize, rank those. We're going to look at for the high and medium type of restoration projects that look like they have the most potential for success and begin tackling those. But a lot of it depends on the type of project, the location. If it's on private property, it's a little more challenging than on public property, government property. And then also funding is another factor, how much funding can be available for doing these projects. But it's definitely a big task that we're going to keep working away at over the years.
All right, next question. I live along Tice Creek, but I'm not sure which watershed group covers this area. Is it within the City of Walnut Creek group?
I would say that the city of the Friends of the Creeks, which is the Walnut Creek based group, is the one that you should talk to initially. There's a small section of Tice Creek that is in unincorporated area, which means it's not a part of the city. But I think the Friends of the Creeks group is the right one to go to for Tice Creek.
How will this interact with the already completed Lower Walnut Creek restoration project?
The Lower Walnut Creek Restoration Project has done a lot of mitigation work itself, and basically is a self-mitigating project. Probably has used up all the restoration opportunities on that site. So I don't think that there's really going to be anything to add, but it's definitely something worth tracking as a historical site with, but yeah, so that's the plan for it now, is just to note it as a successful restoration project.
From the advocacy group standpoint, I would add to that only that I feel that that restoration project, one is very important to have done, is very successful, is an excellent example. But to me, it really spurs our interest in moving forward with restoration on the rest of the watershed.
Good point. And Emma, it looks like you might be missing the one from Monica. Did you see that one?
Yes, I see that now. So what is causing fish crustacean death in Grayson Creek behind the Pleasant Hill Middle School? And then PHIG does monthly water quality monitoring of the creek in that area.
I'm not aware of that issue, so thank you for bringing that to our attention. And it'd be great to connect with you to do more research and investigation to follow up on that. I know there's various groups that are monitoring water quality, but there's also the difference could be that you could actually do autopsies on the crustaceans and find out what's going on.
And I would also suggest reaching out to the Friends of Pleasant Hill Creeks, who I'm sure would be very interested in that information as well.
Great.
Next question. Even if there will be specific projects, will the plan be comprehensive?
I hope so.
But yeah, that's our goal. It just depends on how you define comprehensive. If there's a section of the watershed where the property owners are refusing to cooperate, then it's challenging for us to get in there and do what we need to do, but we will do our best.
Okay, and we have a comment about an issue of dumping into the watershed. There was a report of dumping at the Concord Avenue overpass. It was reported and then it was addressed. There should be a more transparent process to report and address this type of problem.
We agree, and that's one of the reasons why the Resource Conservation District does a lot of cleanups, but that obviously cannot solve the problem alone. I will provide in the chat a link to a page that we have on our website that has some resources for illegal dumping, including I believe it has the county's there's a hotline that you can call, 1-800-NO-DUMPING if you find illegal dumping research or illegal dumping in the county. But yeah, this is a big problem that cities are dealing with and the county is also dealing with.
What are the most relevant regulations that require watershed improvement? Which agency or agencies are most responsible to meet these regulations?
Yeah, I'll take that question. This is Claudia Gimberling, Contra Costa County Public Works Department, Environmental Services Division. Primarily, it's the Regional Water Quality Control Board, State Water Resources Control Board. It's the Porter Cologne Water Quality Control Act. That's the driving regulation. There are lots of, there are other overlapping regulations among other agencies such as Department of Fish and Wildlife and United States Army Corps of Engineers, but primarily it's the State Water Resources Control Board / Regional Water Quality Control Board and implementing the Porter Cologne Water Quality Control Act.
And then I would just add that the way that's regulated is with individual projects. So for example, the Flood Control District wanted to do a sediment removal project on Grayson Creek. So we have to obtain permits from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers, and potentially others. And their requirements will limit the time of year we can work, the type of work we can do, and maybe even say this certain area you can't do any work. You have to work around it because there's endangered species there, et cetera. So those the agencies that regulate that type of activity are the ones that tell us what we can and can't do. So we become responsible to meet all of those requirements.
So thank you, Claudia and Tim. The next one I noticed that the creeks are wildlife corridors that enable animals to move around neighborhoods where they might be blocked by infrastructure. Are you going to improve the ability of animals to move around?
That is a huge goal of this plan. And I think we covered it a little bit when Bob was talking about the fish passage. And I think that this is something that we're going to all be keeping in mind whenever we're thinking about prioritizing projects.
And if you're aware of any wildlife barriers, let us know, and we'd be happy to follow up on those, put them on our maps, etc.
I will add to that I think some of the creek restoration work that we are doing in terms of removal of invasive species like arundo and like English ivy in particular, are having beneficial effects to providing habitat for wildlife. Equally important to removing a barrier, perhaps, is actually having habitat there that is wildlife friendly. And ivy and Arundodonx and some of the other invasive species are particularly problematic. What we have seen, because I'm going to add to the second part, in addition to removal of the ivy, we've planted some native plants, including some pollinator plants in Civic Park and Walnut Creek. And one of the people involved in that process has observed a resurgence of butterflies that she hadn't seen there for years. And it's all a result of the removal of the two invasive species and the planting of natives. And so it's not just about removing barriers, it's also about providing habitat that they can use effectively.
Thank you. What is the possibility of scientific studies on water quality and on fish presence? It's important to know the baseline health of the creeks and essential to provide sustaining funds for these and other studies and funds to restore the creeks. Another question added on, where do these funds come from?
I can answer that question. So this effort that we're doing now is just the beginning. This is a community outreach phase, and we're hearing what issues you're aware of, learning from you, and then we're also going to be, on top of that, doing scientific studies, just like is being proposed: water quality, fish presence, temperature, fish barriers, wildlife barriers. You know, the whole gamut of things is going to be part of our plan that we're working on, and there'll be more information to come as we go on that route. And then the question, where do these funds come from? At this point, the funds are coming from the flood control district. We will be looking for grant opportunities, partnering opportunities, etc. But so far, it's coming from flood control district funds.
Great. All right, next question. Are there any efforts to infiltrate or detain stormwater runoff before it arrives at the creek and its tributaries?
I can answer that question. Yes, there are a lot of efforts to infiltrate, detain, clean, treat, however you want to say it, stormwater runoff. Typically, new construction is required to do that. Housing development, shopping centers, you know, what school, whatever, is putting in a stormwater basin that is cleaning the stormwater. And then there's an effort also to rehabilitate and retrofit older facilities that may not have that. That is another charge under the Regional Water Quality Control Board, is to clean the stormwater before it goes into the creeks, rivers, and the bay. So there is lots more coming. There is a long-range plan with a lot of what they call green stormwater infrastructure that all the public agencies need to install or enforce developers to install.
John Muir Land Trust is active at the mouth of the creek. Are they involved as a stakeholder?
So we are outreaching to many, many agencies, including John Muir Land Trust, to get them involved in these conversations and make sure that they understand that we are working on this restoration plan and that we want to hear from them in terms of if they have suggestions or ideas, we definitely want the involvement of those folks. So yes, the answer is yes.
And we had a similar introduction meeting last week to agencies, and John Muir Land Trust was represented in the audience at that meeting. But yeah, we also have an individual long-term relationship with John Muir Land Trust.
If a private landowner is interested in stabilizing a bank or getting rid of invasive plants, is this an appropriate kind of project?
Yes, definitely is. So far I haven't heard any project that wouldn't be eligible. Basically, anything to do with creek, whether it's the flow is year round or it's ephemeral creek, perennial creek, whatever. It's a lot. It's going to be pretty broad.
Hey, Tim, I'd like to just jump in for a second here on this issue of erosion control. And I think this came up in the very first question or comment about creeks in Lafayette. There was interest in eroding creeks. And there are lots of ways to address eroding creeks that both can address the erosion and provide habitat and good solutions at the same time. And so, you know, and a lot of this depends on the physical constraints of the site, including maybe the steepness of the banks, or how wide the creek is, or how constrained maybe a neighboring property or structure is. But there's lots of ways to look at it. And stabilizing a creek bank, the days of that, it would just be putting concrete in or hardscape. Those are behind us. And while sometimes that is necessary, for the most part in this plan, the priority is going to be looking at approaches that emphasize opportunities to not only stabilize a bank, but create a better stream bank that can be sustained and stable for long term and provide habitat. So thank you for the questions. And again, if you're a private landowner and you have eroding banks or destabilized banks, we want to hear from you. So follow up with us, and probably Lisa may be the best contact there for that type of project, but let us know.
And something I'd like to add too, I mean, maybe it's obvious to us, but you know, everything in the watershed is connected. You may think your property has some problems and it's no big deal. No, it's all interconnected. So what's happening on your property is going to cause problems upstream and downstream of you. Maybe be sending sediment into one of our flood control channels. It's not the greatest for wildlife and native habitat, et cetera. So yeah, we don't want any opportunity missed or any stone unturned, because it's all connected, and the health of one area, the more you can have healthy areas, the better the entire watershed will be.
Great, thank you. All right, next question. How will the Watershed Restoration Plan integrate with Envision Contra Costa urban greening in the climate resilience plans?
Good question. But yeah, we will be looking at those documents and seeing how they fit. Those are overarching plans prepared by the county. That's going to be city plans as well. So there'll be a lot of information that we would sort through to see where the connectivity is between our plans and city and county plans. But definitely all of those plans do have something to say about watershed health and community health. So we would look for the opportunities there.
Drought structures are not conducive to natural habitats, riparian, anadromous fish, etc. Is there any general policy or strategy about drought structures?
I can start this one, and then maybe Bob, you can join in too. Okay. Yes. Drop structures are something that was the technology of the day in the 60s, the way to control fast flowing stormwater and protect homes and businesses, shopping centers from flooding. There have been a lot of challenges caused by those. And today there is new technology, new ways of slowing the water down and moving it in safe ways that does not involve a large concrete structure. Also provides the ability for fish and on other animals to move upstream and downstream in a creek. So it's definitely something that's changed over time. And I don't know if there's really a general policy or strategy, but it's looking for opportunities. There's different ways to deal with it. A fish ladder could be built. We have a fish ladder over in Wildcat Creek. We have one in Pinole Creek, and we have one in Marsh Creek. So we do have a history and track record with those. That's a possibility for any drop structures that are in the Walnut Creek watershed. Of course, removing them is best for habitat, but that needs to be the ability to remove a drop structure and also provide flood protection needs to be carefully considered. Anything you want to add, Bob?
Oh, yes, but Tim, I really appreciated your answer on that one. I'll start by just mentioning that back in the 1940s, you could fish in Walnut Creek in the city of Walnut Creek. And that since then, a lot has changed. And Tim mentioned the flooding, and we tend to forget that in the 1950s, and I wasn't here, but I've seen pictures, downtown Walnut Creek had 2 or 3 feet of water in all the stores and stuff like that. So some of the structures that were built because the people at that time demanded, and that the Army Corps of Engineers and others take action to reduce the flooding that was occurring, not the threat of flooding, but the actual flooding that was occurring. And Tim aptly described, how technology has changed. And, if we had the same situation now, the the agencies would look at it a little differently. From an advocacy group standpoint, we are very much interested in seeing what can be done to improve the habitat, to enable fish passage through some of the drop structures, particularly the ones that are further down where we have a continuing, where you have a perennial stream. Some of the drop structures in the upper part of the watershed, there's not. They're ephemeral streams. They dry up in the summertime, so you don't have a lot of fish living in them. But for the ones in the lower part of the watershed, I think part of the process that we're going through now will be to identify what level of priority to give to the various projects that could enhance or support or enable fish passage. But that's one of the reasons we're going through this, and one of the reasons also we're seeking your thoughts and your opinions and ideas about how we should proceed.
Great answers. Will this be integrated with the Lower Walnut Creek Restoration Project? I think this was touched on a little bit ago, but this question is slightly different.
Yeah, I can't think of anything different from what we answered before, but that project, Lower Walnut Creek, has encouraged us to do a lot more restoration in the watershed and given us good partners, relationships, a lot of things like that. So it's the watershed plan is definitely going to describe what has happened in Lower Walnut Creek, and so maybe check it off the list, so to speak. Restoration has occurred, so we can start working on some other areas. That's how I would answer it.
Next question is about arundo removal. How is it going?
Yeah. Well, we've got a lot of arundo left to deal with. In the San Ramon Creek watershed, they've done a really great job of removing arundo and learning that there are various techniques. In Southern California, the arundo is so vast that they use helicopter spraying. Here, it is not so vast, and there are individual stands, but there's a lot of those stands, and it spreads really quite quickly throughout, mostly by flowing downstream. So I would say it's going fairly well, particularly in the San Ramon Creek watershed, but there has been arundo removal in a couple of the other tributary watersheds as well. And arundo removal is one of those invasive species that you can't just go and lop it off and say, well, you're done. It usually takes 3 or 4 times to reach out to that particular stand of arundo before you can say you've actually eradicated arundo there. And then I view it's also important to come back in and plant it with some native plants so that there's so that you're creating some positive habitat in addition to just removing the arundo.
Next question, am I correct that building road bridges in North Concord paid for the creek improvements in Lafayette? Can mitigation be performed anywhere in the watershed, or does it need to be within a close proximity?
So I'll start, and if anybody wants to supplement. The council has been involved in several what we call off-site mitigation projects. The very first one was with the Broadway Plaza expansion back in 2014, and we helped identify a location. If you live in Concord and you go to Newhall Park, there is an ongoing creek restoration. Last year they constructed it, and they've got about 5 years of monitoring. The goal and our goal is when we see get a request, can you do some offsite mitigation, is to try to place it in the same tributary watershed, but sometimes that's not possible. And so, when the Concord Bridges project and they had to do some offsite mitigation there, we found some sites in Walnut Creek and Lafayette. And, in essence, we're trying to do the best we can. But, one of the things that's important here is for each, regardless of where you live, to identify sites so that there are an ample number of potential sites in each tributary watershed, so that when a request comes to us for, do you have this type of mitigation or that type of mitigation, we can find the site that is closest to the site where the impact is occurring. One of the reasons the council was created was that prior to our creation, our impression is all of the offsite mitigation was being directed outside of the Walnut Creek watershed. So one of the reasons we started meeting together was we wanted to try to make sure that that if there's a project the project in the watershed that requires offsite mitigation, that offsite mitigation occurs in the watershed. So if anybody wants to add to that, please feel welcome.
I might just add to the general question at the end here: can mitigation be performed anywhere in the watershed, or does it need to be in close proximity? And that the requirement for mitigation will be coming from the regulatory agency that is issuing an authorization or a permit to conduct a project. And so it will be up to their discretion on if the mitigation location or type is acceptable. So there's no hard and fast rule, and really what usually different regulatory agencies may have different missions of what they're looking to do, but they'll typically look at where's the location of the impact, what is the type of impact, and their general preference is to try and mitigate as close as possible in kind and in type. Meaning if a project impacts a certain type of habitat, they would like to see a mitigation that would restore that type of habitat. So, and as close as possible. But because opportunities are limited, there's often flexibility applied. So they'll let you kind of maybe perhaps look a little further afield if it's an in-kind type of mitigation. But as Bob described, it's best to try and keep it within the watershed. So there are a lot of opportunities in this Walnut Creek watershed to achieve different types of mitigation.
Next question. Tice Creek runs through a golf course. Due in large part to irrigation of the grass, a number of 200 to 300-year-old trees have died. Do you know what species of trees could be used to restore?
We could certainly talk more about this, Dan, for sure, but I think that we could definitely look at some species that could work there. But obviously we also don't want too much irrigation given to native trees because that will kill them. So I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that, but we can talk about species for sure.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Neither do I.
Next question. How does watershed restoration fit with water regeneration?
So I think you're talking about getting more water into the ground table or groundwater table areas, or getting more drinking water, that kind of thing. And yeah, typically doing a restoration project, especially if you're removing some concrete, like that daylighting project talked about earlier, that's going to get more of the rainwater into the ground and recharge the groundwater. So that's a good aspect. And then also the green stormwater infrastructure facilities, those are allowing water to soak into the ground before it goes into a pipe and over to a creek. So that's going to help also. But we, at this point, we're not planning on doing any groundwater studies. We're not aware of any groundwater problems, but if anyone is aware of groundwater problems, wells stopped working or something like that, that'd be helpful to let us know. And then we don't have any plans to provide any drinking water, stock ponds, or something for people or for irrigation, that kind of thing. That at this point is not part of this plan. I believe other agencies handle drinking water, Contra Costa Water District and East Bay Mud. So at this point, we're not planning on doing anything to improve drinking water sources.
Cities or government agencies add projects to this list later if they have projects that need mitigation. Do the regulatory agencies prefer self-mitigation for projects?
And I can answer that question. Yes, definitely. We want cities, government agencies, even private owners to be able to add projects in the future. I guess we haven't talked about how we could do that, but it probably as simple as have a website with a form that you fill out, and we could log in, additional requests, information about restoration sites. And then the goal is for a pretty large suite of different types of restoration projects being made available on a list. So a city would just need to get a hold of the plan and review it to see what type of project is going to fit. So that's the first question. Then the second question about regulatory agencies preferring self-mitigating projects. Yes, most of the time that is the primary request. But in urban areas, it's very challenging to do. So off-site improvements are allowed. But yeah, regulatory agencies do prefer self-mitigating projects.
Well, imagine development of the Concord Naval Base will impact the Clayton Valley Drain. Is that on your radar for pushing proper watershed care?
That's a good question. I think for the most part, that project is going to impact the Mount Diablo Creek watershed. And so I don't know if anyone has done any studies about how it may affect the Clayton Valley Drain, but if anyone hears anything, I'm sure that we would love to know that. And yeah, I don't know if Tim, if you've heard of anything.
In general, I can say that the redevelopment plan for the naval base has had a lot of public hearings and meetings, environmental studies, and the flood control district and the county have been able to provide comments, watershed type comments, and trying to restore creeks and not make things worse. So I don't know the specifics, but I'm sure there's a lot of feedback that's been given to the city and the developers about that project.
Right. What is being done regarding pesticide and fertilizer runoff?
There are a lot more regulations regarding the use of pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers. There is a county integrated pest management committee that regulates that. If I'm not, I would assume they have a website and you can educate yourself more on what's happening. But if you're not able to find something, just email one of us and we can get you connected with the Integrated Pest Management Task Force and how they operate. And then in general, any agency or even backyard landscapers, if they're applying herbicide, they're supposed to read the directions and do online training and be very careful with how they apply it. And then government agencies, especially if we're going to be spraying in a creek situation, maybe trying to remove cattails or some other invasive species, we have to have special training and a lot of oversight and monitoring and reporting whenever we use that. So it's only being used at for the right reason and very limited use and the right recipe, so to speak, to make sure that you're in the right conditions. You don't do it on a hot day. There's just a whole bunch of things to make it as minimally invasive and safe as possible. And then the other thing that's happening is whenever we see invasives, our first knee-jerk reaction is not, oh, get out the herbicide or get out the blowtorch, like it used to be 50 years ago. Now it's like, okay, can we get a group of volunteers to come out and remove this? Can we find other ways to do it? So that's definitely a factor today.
Thank you. Next question. What anadromous fish, eels, etc. are historically in the watershed, and do any lend themselves to endangered species funding opportunities?
So I think it would be steelhead and coho salmon, probably. But yeah, we're not fish experts, but we are going to be hiring fish experts that are going to advise us on that. What's known of historical information, what type of habitat is available, maybe habitat areas that need to be improved, that kind of thing. So that will be not part of this immediate effort we're doing now, but something that we'll be doing in the not too distant future.
And there are other endangered species that might be present in some of the areas that we're talking about, and those include like the red-legged frog and
Tiger salamander.
Western pond turtle, yeah, tiger salamander. So yes, that is a consideration, and that is always a consideration before doing any restoration project, as it is part of the CEQA process. And if necessary, a biologist or more biologists will be on site to make sure that nothing happens to species like that, protected species.
And it would, part of the question is, will it lend itself to funding opportunities? And yes, that typically is the case. We would do a study and it would show that there is value in doing a project to improve this habitat. And then as we write a grant proposal, we talk about the benefits that are going to happen. So that's a project that we did in Brentwood called the Three Creeks Restoration. That was part of our funding, was to improve salmon habitat out there. So it helped us get funding.
What should individual homeowners be doing to reduce stormwater runoff? Might this issue be included in the plan being developed?
That is a good question. So I believe the County Clean Water Program has done some education and outreach on this, and typically the idea is the stormwater runoff that's coming from your roof or your driveway, if it can get into grassy areas before it goes into the street or into a creek, then that gives it an opportunity to slow it down, let it sink into the ground, and also treat some of the chemicals that might be in it. But I'm pretty sure there's handouts and I think websites with all that kind of information. So we hadn't thought of putting that in the plan, but I think, yeah, that'd be something relatively simple to put in, a little education piece about what individual homeowners can do to improve watershed health, and then have links to those websites.
And the County Watershed Program provides a lot of information about that, and I will put the link in the chat.
Good idea. Thank you.
Where is the info on regulations about discharges into the creeks, for instance, from pipes from golf courses?
I might have to look at the Regional Water Quality Control Board's website and see what the regulations are. Yeah, the challenge is, older facilities, there isn't really regulations as long as you're using it for the same purpose. But if you start running an auto repair business and your oil is leaking and paint business and whatever, and that starts going through the pipe, then it's an issue. If it's from a golf course, I'm not sure if there's much regulation on that, but that'd be the place to look, is the Regional Water Quality Control Board website.
We are almost done with the new general plan in Pleasant Hill. I imagine other cities are updating their general plans. How can locals encourage our local general plans to adopt this plan's recommendations? Also, the county plan may want to integrate the plan into the plan.
So I'll start with a couple answers, and then maybe somebody else can supplement. For cities and towns, I mean, this plan is actually, my thinking about this plan is it's going to provide a portfolio of projects, of restoration projects, as opposed to standards and guidelines, for example, for private property owners. And so it's not something that I would necessarily think that, say, a local general plan, a city general plan would necessarily have much of a relationship to, per se. Having said that, the local creek groups and others have an important role to play with those local regulatory processes, local planning processes, to try to make sure that they have as much consideration of the importance and the value of creeks and riparian areas and wetland areas, and that they place a high priority on the protection of riparian areas, including a buffer. So I think there's an important role there, and the county is going through a general plan process, and the Watershed Council has decided that it wishes to comment on that plan and to be involved in it, and to encourage that the county plan, which applies to the unincorporated parts of the county, not to the cities and towns, be as creek friendly and as possible. But it's really advocacy by the local creek groups and others that will help that result occur.
Watershed health has been negatively impacted by groundwater overdraft, which has disconnected streams from alluvial aquifers and eliminated groundwater discharge to streams in the summer. Is this issue being considered and addressed?
No, I don't really know much about groundwater and even some of the terms you're using in here, so maybe I'm not the right person, but it's something that that's the second question about that that's come up. So we're going to learn some more about groundwater and overdraft, those kind of issues. So that'll be something we look into as we're developing our watershed plan.
Next question, are projects where no homeless live more likely to progress to construction than projects where there are more homeless present?
I don't think that that's necessarily a determining factor at this point. I think it really depends on where you're talking about and who the landowner is, and safety, et cetera. So I don't know if I would say that this is determining. So like, I don't think that the projects would be more likely to progress just because of that.
Yeah, I agree. It may be a factor as far as, visiting the site and doing some investigations, but if we select the site and it is funded, then we would be able to have the homeless relocated and do the project.
Great, thank you. All right, we got another comment and question. Arundo may be the reed that is responsible for Ukraine's super fertile and black soil. It is difficult to remove, but should be composted for soil regeneration.
It's an interesting idea. I will just mention that not all of our composting facilities will compost arundo because, well, for a couple of different reasons. But I mean, in general, I think we support composting, but it is difficult for invasive species because sometimes they are able to vegetatively propagate. And in this case, that can be an issue with arundo. So we're usually able to chip it and use it away from creeks, but usually it ends up in the trash.
In some cases, we have, as you know, as Lisa indicated, used a chipper instead of putting it into a dumpster. But again, with the view that it would be chipped away from the creek. And it then actually functions as a bit of mulch away from the creek, because when you go through a chipper, well, first of all, it basically spreads by rhizomes, which are the roots underground. And when you go send it through a chipper and you chip away you cut up those rhizomes, you actually pretty much eliminate the ability of the arundo to regenerate at that site. But you still take the care of making sure that you don't spread the chips near the creek. And then the other thing I would add to that is that it's if you don't have a place close by to chip it, you know, because this is being done by volunteers who are carrying the arundo stalks of arundo, the dumpster is really going to be the most effective way to deal with it.
Next question. When a wetlands mitigation site fails, is there any recourse?
Claudia, would you like to help with that one, or will you want me to take it?
Yeah, sure, I'll take it. Yeah, typically, when there are sites that don't succeed, the requirement from the agencies for the most part is to find, is to adapt, to find other ways to, because some sites, you know, the goal is to do in-kind mitigation, whether it be on-site or off-site, but sometimes what is proposed we think is going to work doesn't work. And in those cases, then we revisit it and look to see what the conditions are, what's causing the failure. And we're just working with the regional, excuse me, I say regional board, but also Department of Fish and Wildlife, but the agencies in general, just that's requiring the mitigation to find other solutions. Otherwise, if, yeah, pretty much other solutions. So that's what happens. So there's always the continuation of finding other solutions to mitigate.
And then my experience, I've seen that the requirements for mitigation success have gone up. In the past, you could put in a mitigation site, walk away from it, and then it was 2 years monitoring. Now on our Lower Walnut Creek project, there's a 10-year monitoring requirement. So each year we know that if the habitat and vegetation is increasing and improving, or it's declining, and that gives us an opportunity to make corrective action so that at the end of that 10 years, it will be healthy and self-sustaining. And so I don't, you know, for smaller projects, smaller mitigation sites, I don't imagine it would be 10 years, but typically there's several years of monitoring and corrective action that's taken to make sure a site is successful.
Thank you. This goes back to water regeneration, and I think it's a continuation of the following question. I am thinking of generation of small water cycle and rehydrating by the enhancement of watershed travel. I think that's just a clarification, perhaps, of the previous question about water regeneration.
And if we go down 2 questions, there's someone that's ready to help us. So refer to Mr. Steinpress, who's going to help us with this issue.
Yes, it sounds like we do have a hydrogeologist on the call. So that's awesome to know that we have such a wide knowledge base here, interested and ready to help out. All right, next question. Other than cowscape.org, would this plan include a list of recommended plantings for homeowners to help restore habitat?
You know, I think that is a very reasonable request. And I don't know if we can improve on Cowscape, but if there are any other resources of local vegetation and native plants that do well in this climate, then we'd be happy to put that together and provide it. Because like I was saying earlier, you know, each individual property owner, homeowner can make a difference if everybody, you know, a group of people start doing things that's going to change the health of the watershed.
Thank you for that. Are there any areas that are considered the low-hanging fruit, like the example daylighting project area that is already being looked at?
Yeah, I think that's going to be our high priority restoration sites are the ones that are low hanging fruit, so to speak. But it's not necessarily limited to daylighting or limited to salmon habitat or whatever. We're going to be looking at all different types of restoration projects, anything that's going to provide value.
Great, thank you. Going back to the arundo removal and composting, we have a comment that Republic does compost removed arundo that is chipped and then put into a donated dumpster. Where we have access to open space, we like to do chip on site for composting. So thank you for that.
So for clarity, Dick is the head of the Friends of San Ramon Creek, and he is the one that has led the arundo removal efforts together with Mike Ancio in the San Ramon Creek watershed. So he's one of the two people that, from my standpoint, are most knowledgeable about this subject.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification, Bob. All right. Well, that looks like it's the end of our questions. We have about 10 minutes left. If there are any sort of additional questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. Maybe we can hang out for a minute to allow any last minute questions. Other than that, thank you everybody for your questions. Lots of great questions and suggestions that have been brought to our attention today. So thank you for sharing those with us.
Okay. Well, it's been good working with everyone and good listening to all the people and one more thanks to the library for hosting this webinar. I don't think we could have done something like this without their assistance. So, and you know, you have our addresses or email addresses in front of you, and you have follow-up information, or you want to participate in the Watershed Council, the Walnut Creek Watershed Council. You can go to our website, it was indicated earlier, and we'd be glad to have you join our consideration and our collaborative effort with the Flood Control District and the Resource Conservation District to produce the Walnut Creek Watershed Restoration Plan.
Right, we did have one more question. Oh, it looks like it's being addressed. What email or person is best to respond to for landowners and public ideas for restoration?
I think you can reach out to any of us. We're all working very closely together on this plan. So if you get the information to one of us, it will most likely be shared with the rest of us.
And we will also share it with the individual friends groups, so that because there are local people that know the most about their tributary watershed.
And Lisa, the question, I don't know, that might have been, because I know you had a question earlier about the Simple program for private landowners that may need assistance.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you have Lisa, do you have that website handy? I don't think you can put it in.
Yes, I can put it in. Give me 1 second.
Put it in the chat. So yeah, people that are still on the call, hold on a minute. So occasionally there are people with issues of a creek in their backyard. They're not really sure how to deal with erosion, tree falls in, different problems happening, invasive ivy coming in, and the flood control district funds a program called Streamside Management for private landowners. And you can contact them. They'll come out and do a site visit and take some measurements and assess and make some recommendations on environmentally friendly repairs using trees, shrubs, and native plants and those kind of things to help with situations in the creek in your backyard. So we're definitely happy to share that information with anyone that's interested.
Thank you for sharing that resource. All right, and I'm not seeing any additional questions in the Q&A, so maybe it's a good time to wrap up. So yeah, thank you everybody so much for joining the call. As has been mentioned, please feel free to reach out to any of the contacts that we provided that are on the screen. If you have any additional questions or anything to share with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, good night,
Nice night.
everyone.
Have
Thank
a
you.
good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.